darlings? Well, we're coming to the tail end of summer, and what better way to finally say goodbye to all this heat and sweat than by taking a look at a movie involving pinball, holiday camps, running through fields of flowers, paedophilia, and sensory deprivation. All things that scream summer to me.
They do?
Yeah, I had some very weird summers growing up. With taking a look at the rock opera cult classic, Tommy. Yes, one of the weirdest, most bizarre, but also just straight up awesome rock operas ever made. But it does have a lot to make fun of, so let's dive right in.
Not so fast!
Huh? Who's that?
How dare you make fun of Tommy, one of my favourite movies!
And what are you going to do about it, Enchanted Essays, well-known reviewer of films and TV shows spawned from 60s pop bands?
Oh, just you wait. Just you wait.
I'm sure it'll be fine. Now let's get into the history. The film started off as a concept album by the absolute rock legends, The Who. For those who don't know, a concept album is an album where all the songs are made to be tied together, and when listened to chronologically in their listing on the album, tell a story. The 60s and the 70s were where this trend really took off, with bands like The Who, The Beatles, and David Bowie, making ones that have gone on to be considered some of the best albums of all time.
And yet my concept album, Huckaphenia, remains on the shelf.
Probably because the album consists entirely of high-pitched screeching and howling noises.
So, that's what all Yoko Ono's albums are.
Naturally, concept albums were the perfect basis to become movies and stage shows, since they're basically musicals that have already had the music written, you just need to add visuals. This idea probably started with the films that the Beatles and the Monkees made around their own songs, which were essentially the first forms of music videos, and then the idea expanded from there. And some of these movies based off concept albums have gone on to be regarded as absolute classics, whereas others time has not been so kind to.
And some of which the reviews have nearly destroyed careers, right, nostalgia critic?
Ooh, that's a deep cut. Despite the hype over being one of the first rock operas in film form, and how popular the movie was at the time, the film has not been as well remembered as The Who's next movie, Quadrophenia, which has gone on to be considered a cultural landmark. However, Tommy has gained a big cult following, which is growing bigger and bigger all the time. And also, unlike Quadrophenia, which was only a loose adaptation of the album, Tommy is pretty much the album with visuals, as every song is used in the movie, with virtually no spoken dialogue, like a true opera, and only a few extra songs added to help with the runtime and narrative, which is funny because the plot of Tommy, both the album and the film, are some of the most insane things I have ever seen. As with the Beatles, in the late 60s, Pete Townsend started to become further interested in spirituality and alternate health and medical care, and by that I don't just mean that he took a lot of drugs. I mean, he did, and that probably also influenced the story, but that's not what I'm talking about. This then fueled the idea about a story of a person who has virtually no interaction with the outside world, being deaf, blind, and unable to feel anything, or dumb as the album puts it, and exists more or less purely within his own headspace. But despite that idea, the movie is not about going through the adventures of one's own mind.
That's basically what Yellow Submarine is.
True that. The movie is about how this poor boy with little or no way to support himself is constantly faced with the harsh realities of a world that treats him like trash, and yet he himself remains powerless, and yet, when he finally becomes aware and gains his sense back, he himself is shown to be easily manipulated and has a bit of a messiah complex. In a weird way, it's kind of the story of Clockwork Orange reversed, where instead of a terrible person being knocked down to the ground and being abused themselves, it's an abused person suddenly being skyrocketed to the top, and then becoming a bad person themselves.
And perhaps it's a metaphor for what it's like being a rock star when you started off as just a poor boy from a poor family.
Whoa, this is getting deep. Where's my drugs? But enough with the introspection, let's get into the movie itself. The film was directed by Ken Russell, who that same year also directed a movie called Litsomania, which also starred The Who and is also some classic mid-70s fun insanity. I've always regarded Old Ken as being like the slightly poor man's version of Stanley Kubrick, and I only say slightly because he is a genuinely great director, but he clearly took a lot of influence from old Kubrick, with his visual style being very odd and surreal in how it is shot, but the actual sets and what is being filmed not always being as elaborate and large in scale as something you would see in like 2001: A Space Odyssey or A Clockwork Orange. Still, he clearly was the right choice for the movie given his odd style and sense of humour. The film was released in 1975 and starred quite a few big names at the time, and not just in acting but also music, who we'll see as the movie goes on. But that's enough exposition for now. Let's get into the plot of the movie. The movie opens with a beautiful sunset shot followed by a montage of a couple in love, the man of which looking like Peter Cushing with a terrible 70s haircut.
Still looks better than the wig he wore in the late 70s.
These are Tommy's parents. His father is a member of the Royal Air Force, and the two seem to be caught in the middle of the Blitz. I mean, this movie was released in 1975, and when Tommy grows up it seems to be set at that year, so the timeline does match. It's just that Jerry curl really distracts you. Apparently they figured out a way to invent heated hair tongs in the 1940s. As this intro goes on, Tommy's mother, whose name is Nora and is played by Anne Margaret, is told that her husband won't be coming home and their unborn child will never know him. Literally, that's what the song says.
Captain Walker didn't come home, his unborn child will never know him.
This is a good point to say that the movie's arrangement of the music is very different from the album. The album was done in the Who style at that time in the late 60s, where everything was a more acoustically driven and the Who were often singing in harmony.
Do you think it's alright to leave the boy with Uncle Ernie?
Here, well, since it's the 70s, it's synthesizers everywhere. There are some cases where this makes some of the songs sound rather weird from their original versions, but for the most part, it does help make the songs sound more grand and fitting with the cinematic theme. Also, as the guest musicians come in, they'll also be adding their own spin to their songs, but we'll get into that in a bit. Back to the plot. Tommy is born, and when he's 5, his mother takes him to a holiday camp where they meet Frank, played by Oliver Reed, and he and Nora hit it off very quickly.
If you could feel this silken thigh, you'd know.
You don't know how much I've missed to feel a man again.
Probably because flirting with the staff is the only fun thing to do at a holiday camp.
As someone who lives close to a Butlins, I wholeheartedly agree. Frank and Nora eventually get together, and they and Tommy become a family living at the holiday camp, with Tommy dreaming of one day owning his own. I would say that you should make a rock and roll holiday camp, but the Rolling Stones beat you to that idea in The Simpsons. However, something is about to happen that is going to change his life forever. Turns out Tommy's dad didn't die, and he tracked down his wife to the holiday camp, and Frank kills him.
Jesus Christ!
Oh, we're just getting started. Tommy sees it all, and Frank and Nora tell him that he didn't see or hear anything, but seems like he takes it a bit too literally since it causes him to psychosomatically become blind, deaf, and unable to react to anything. Which may sound horrible, but it looks as if Nora and Frank were about to have sex before Tommy's dad interrupted, and if he walked in on that, I'm sure he wished he was blind, deaf, and dumb. This is where the main body of the story takes off, now that Tommy is essentially a catatonic but still active person. The majority of the movie becomes about how the rest of the world treats him now that he is like that. I honestly don't know how to feel about this sort of story since it's so unlike anything else I've ever seen, and it's told in such a surreal and bizarre way that it really throws me through a loop. And I've seen some weird stuff in my life, but this just constantly keeps you guessing, and I genuinely don't know if it's pure insanity or pure genius. Though it does lead to some great visuals like this rather hilarious shot of Tommy with a box on his head.
Sickness will surely take the night.
Well, now he looks like he's doing the world's laziest Minecraft cosplay.
As the scenes of Tommy's childhood go on, it's shown that his parents worried that with no sensory input, his spiritual self will not be heightened. But this is where the true heart of the story and Townsend's idea comes in, that through total sensory deprivation, he himself is remaining pure and his spiritual side is growing through having no outside influence. It's a really interesting idea, and while the way in which they are presenting the idea is a bizarre one, and the point does kind of lose it a bit through translation, it does still have some weight to it, and it does draw on old Buddhist ideas of meditation. It should also be noted that in the original album, the murder was the other way around, in that Frank was the one who was killed, and I think it was clever to have it be switched. Since what we see of Frank doing throughout the movie, it does feel more like something an abusive stepfather would do, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Eventually, Tommy grows up and he is now played by Roger Daltrey, doing an amazing performance and looking like he is truly brain dead. And I know that sounds like an insult, but no, I really mean it. Looking like your senses are completely dead is an incredibly hard acting job to pull off. Especially in this sort of production where everything is so insane and active, to not even so much as move your eyes is incredibly hard. I really salute him for pulling off that kind of performance. This is also the part where the cameos start coming in, with the remaining members of The Who playing in the choir of a Marilyn Monroe themed church. I would say how stupid this is, but given how pop star celebrity worship would evolve over the next few decades, maybe they were ahead of the curve there. And the priest himself being played by Eric Clapton.
She's got the power to heal you. Never fear.
Unless she's trying to heal you through COVID vaccinations, Eric?
I thought he was just talking about cocaine again. I mean, he certainly could use it. He's acting so subdued here that taking some blow would probably do him some good right now.
She's got the power to heal you. Never fear.
Oh, there he goes. He must have taken some off screen. Actually, that's Arthur Brown, the guy who did the song Fire, who is one of the few artists who acts less weird in this movie than he did in his own music. This is the point where the movie really starts to become more of a set of music videos stitched together, which either can turn people off, or if you're like me and you love classic bands and weird 70s movies, you'll love it. And to be fair, with so many famous artists, it only makes sense that a lot of the movie would feel like one ongoing music video. Each artist is given the freedom to express their style in their songs. Eric Clapton and Arthur Brown do that in theirs, Eyesight for the Blind, and the same happens in the next scene, where Frank and Nora take Tommy to a crazy alternative therapist played by the sadly recently no longer with us Tina Turner, and does the same with her song Acid Queen. This is, again, a rather interesting commentary on new spiritual beliefs at the time, since a lot of people felt that by using LSD, they could achieve new states of consciousness and rise above their body and have a totally out-of-body experience. Unfortunately, the Acid Queen's attempts are not as successful as the characters in Akira's attempts to do the same thing, nor is it a particularly glamorizing depiction of taking acid. Then again, sticking a needle in his head probably didn't help.
I'm starting to get an idea of the writing process of this film.
Still, Tina does an amazing job as she always did, and I have to give her credit for giving it her all while wearing that insane and probably none too heavy helmet. Also, there's a weird part where Tommy turns into his dad. I'm sure that's part of the trip he's going on, but I'm not sure what it's supposed to mean.
Hey, I've seen weirder things while on acid.
I won't probe further into that. From this point on, Frank and Nora treat Tommy more like an invalid and just leave him with carers to look after him while they go out and have fun. Which is bad enough, but their choice of carers aren't exactly the best. Such as his cousin Kevin, played by Paul Nicholas, who is like the ultimate cartoon of a schoolboy bully who abuses Tommy like a catatonic Looney Tunes character.
How would you feel if I turned on the back, ducked your head under and started to laugh? Hello, Pen. Fancy a shag?
The Cousin Kevin song is one of the best songs in the movie, especially since Paul Nicholas, fresh off his success in Jesus Christ Superstar, really does a great job here, and the orchestration really sells it too, with it starting off very minor with just the piano.
We're on our own, cousin, all alone, cousin.
But then going into a more fully orchestrated score, it really hammers the emotion of the scene home.
I'm the school bully.
And the following song, Fiddle About, is one of the best, though what happens in the scene has been known to turn people away. I will say that Keith Moon's performance as Uncle Ernie is one of the highlights of the movie, mostly because old Keith had a reputation for just not giving a shit and doing whatever the hell he wanted, and that truly shows here. I could totally see Keith Moon insisting that he had to have a drink with an egg in it. That probably wasn't even in the script, he just really wanted to do it. But wicked Uncle Ernie is, well, a paedophile. And while granted the scene itself tries to play off what happens as funny, and the fact that Roger Daltrey was in his 30s at the time does help downplay the ickiness of the scene, it doesn't take away from how messed up it is. It's one of those scenes that you either love or hate. I think I'm in both camps for the reasons I just mentioned. This is also a good time to mention that there was a 1989 live version of this movie done, and while a lot of the celebrity guests did reprise their roles, some couldn't. Keith especially, since he was, well, dead. So they got in replacements. For Cousin Kevin, they got in Billy Idol, who was a perfect choice.
How would you feel if I turn on the fan, ducked your head under, and started to laugh?
And for Uncle Ernie, they got, I'm not kidding here, Phil Collins.
I'm your wicked Uncle Ernie, I'm glad you can't see or hear me as I fiddle about.
Yes, seriously. The father of the edgeless adult contemporary music scene of the 90s once played a lecherous paedophile in a rock opera musical. Pull that fact out next time someone tells you they hate Genesis because it's too soft.
I do wonder why they picked him, though. Did Daltrey and Townsend say, well, our crazy and drug-obsessed drummer can't play the role now. Let's get that guy that everyone hates at the moment because he replaced Peter Gabriel.
Also, a bit off topic, but I really like the way that the hair and makeup on Anne Margaret has evolved through the movie, since she's played Nora throughout the whole film, and how they did a really good job with making her look so young and innocent at the start, but slowly turning her into a worn-out old tart who doesn't give a shit anymore.
So she looks like you now?
Shut up. But this has now led us to the by far best scene in the whole movie, and one that you've probably heard of even if you haven't seen the movie, the Pinball Wizard scene, which involves Tommy discovering that despite his disability, he is an unparalleled pinball player, going up against the Grand Pinball Champion in a contest, who is played by none other than Elton John.
Ever since I was a young boy, I played the silver ball. From Seoul down to Brighton, I must have played them all.
Truly, he has now entered into his final form.
That deaf, dumb, and blind kid shall play the mean pinball.
This scene is just incredible. Out of all the scenes in the movie, this is the one that feels the most like it was meant to be its own standalone music video, but it's just so good that you don't care. Everything about it is amazing. The visuals, the camera work, the performances, and especially the music. Elton John at this point in his career was in that pop rock style with songs like Crocodile Rock, and The Who were also leaning more into the pop metal with songs like Won't Get Fooled Again. So this was the perfect stages of their career for them to do a collaboration in terms of their music, and the mixing of Elton John's rapid-fire piano work and the choir backing and The Who's incredible rock and roll guitar, bass and drums is just one of the best musical experiences in the world. This scene was also a big part in the creation of some of Elton John's iconography, since the giant boots he wears have sort of become a thing of his. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't in the script. Elton John just showed up to the studio wearing them and refused to take them off, so they had to film the scene around it. I have to be wearing my giant boots, you vile pig! Same with Townsend smashing up his guitar and amps. He probably just said to Russell, I gotta do it, man, I haven't done this in years. Of course, Tommy wins the pinball tournament, making him rich and famous.
Tommy keeps on winning, he's a millionaire. Mama's got a brand new Cadillac.
Oh yeah, pinball tournaments, the height of competitive sport events.
Well, given how much money the online Let's Players of this generation make, I'm not actually that surprised. We then have a scene showing Nora reeling in the riches that have come from Tommy's fame, but also being heartbroken over how her son is still unable to see, hear, or feel anything, showing that even despite how shallow and negligent she's become, she still loves her son, which is nice. This then leads to a moment where bubbles, beans, and mud pours from the TV and Nora bathes in it. She and Frank then take Tommy to a doctor to try and cure him, which they probably should have done years ago, who is played by none other than Jack Nicholson, who does a surprisingly good job singing in a British accent.
His eyes react to light, the dial's detected.
Jack Nicholson is one of those guys who is so extremely American, I imagine he had to go home and wash his mouth out after doing an English accent.
I can just imagine that now. Those filthy limeys made me sing in their accent. Give me some Jack Daniels. I gotta wash the filth out. Other than that, the scene is rather pointless, just explaining that Tommy's condition is psychological, which we already knew, but it is cool to see Jack there. This then leads to Tommy's mum no longer being able to take Tommy's lack of response, and in a fit of rage, accidentally throws him through a mirrored window. I should point out that since Tommy lost his senses, he seems to only be able to react to his own reflection, so throwing him through a mirror is sort of symbolically showing that his ego and psyche has been shattered, and he's able to rebuild himself. That, or Roger Daltrey is a massive narcissist and loves looking at his own reflection. Either way, it works, and Tommy regains his senses and revels in one of my favourite songs, I'm Free.
I'm free. Wow, I'm free.
Not only is it a great song, but I love the visual jokes about how he's doing things that will probably lead him to lose his senses again, or just outright kill him. Like a guy who managed to learn to walk and then decides to walk across broken glass. Also, and this is true, when I first moved out of my parents' house, on the first day I actually ran across the beach barefoot whilst listening to this song. No cartwheel, sadly, since I can't do that, but it did feel liberating.
And must have looked really weird.
Since when has that stopped me? Besides, it looks no weirder than when Daltrey runs in front of the green screen. This part of the movie is where the story starts to fall apart a little bit. It's still good, but while the narrative has been a bit loose throughout, it still felt flowing and you could follow it. Here, it feels like the plot unravels and it just becomes a sequence of weird imagery set to music.
Hasn't that been the whole movie so far?
Well, yeah, just even more so. But it is still cool to watch and listen to. Also, it's harder to figure out what they're trying to say here. Throughout the movie, Tommy's been a victim, but now he has his senses back, and he's kind of turned into a self-centered dick. Granted, it's shown that through this part of the movie that Nora and Frank are exploiting his popularity, so you could see it as a commentary on how spirituality has been cheapened and buried under consumerism and money, which is a good commentary. It just seems odd to have an about-face on your protagonist like this. Either way, Tommy ends up forming his own cult based around sensory deprivation and pinball.
Ah, pinball, the path to enlightenment.
This then leads to another great Keith Moon moment where he plays Uncle Ernie again, though thankfully not trying to touch kids this time, welcoming people into Tommy's cult holiday camp, riding a vehicle that looks like something I create in Tears of the Kingdom.
I'm your brother Ernie, and I welcome you to Tommy's holiday camp.
Let's hope he didn't try to drive that into a pool too.
Also, fun fact, that Orgamobile that Keith is driving, he and the winner of a radio contest got to smash it with sledgehammers after the movie was finished, taking the Who's penchant for destruction to the next level. The scene then goes to a group of people worshipping at Tommy's feet and treating him like the new Jesus. Starting to see why Roger Daltrey wanted to make this movie. Unfortunately, the public doesn't seem to like Tommy's confusing rituals of playing pinball while wearing a blindfold, or how much Frank is leeching off of them, and riot against him and kill Frank and Nora, pretty brutally too. Wait, let me kill Meister, what's he doing here? Tommy then runs away, climbs a mountain, and in a beautiful bookend to the opening, claims that he has found true enlightenment as the sun rises, ending the movie.
Listening to you.
So, that was Tommy. What can I say about it? Well, what can't I say about it? This is one of the most insane, bizarre, and in some cases slightly disturbing movies I have ever seen, and I love it. It's the kind of story where you can tell the creators didn't care about form, function, or cliches. They just wanted to tell a story that they wanted to tell, and they just went for it. It almost feels like a story that you'd see in a dream, or the kind of story that I would have written as a teenager. Looking at it from a purely critical standpoint, I'll admit that it's not really an amazing movie. In fact, you could argue if it's even all that good, but as an experience, it's unbelievable. It really does feel like you're on a journey, and even if you can't really draw some tangible conclusions out of it, it does make an emotional resonance with you that makes you feel totally different than you felt before you watched it. Fittingly, it does feel like going through a spiritual journey, or a really good drug trip. What you saw and went through you can't explain, but you know how it made you feel inside. This is not a movie for everyone, but those who like it do swear by it, ironically like a cult. But I can understand why. It's a surreal piece of art, it won't speak to everyone, but those it does speak to, it really hits them hard. I can understand why Quadrophenia is more popular and has more of a cultural impact, since it's more like a proper movie with a proper narrative, but this does feel more like a true passion project, and you really feel the effort and heart that went into every single shot in this film. And so brings this review to an end. But how do we sign off?
Well, since this is a musical, how about with a song?
Oh, hell yeah.
Ever since I was a young cub, I've seen the YouTube stars. From Smash right down to Mr. Beast, they've always gone too far. But no matter how many zoomers with the camera there are, those high view videos can't compare to ours.
Hold it right there!
What?
I told you you'd pay. It's time for me to pull the plug.
Oh shit, no. I've had enough of this. I'm going on the other side.